The air in the small, humidity-drenched training hall was thick enough to choke on, smelling of sweat canvas and the intense focus of a dozen dedicated students. In the center of the room stood a man who weighed no more than 135 pounds, moving with a fluidity that made him look like a flickering shadow against the peeling paint of the walls. This was Bruce Lee in his prime, not yet the global icon on movie posters, but a martial arts revolutionary teaching in obscurity. He was in the middle of explaining the mechanics of the lead punch when the heavy metal door at the back of the gym slammed open, vibrating the floorboards. The rhythm of the class shattered instantly. Standing in the doorway was a human mountain, a man who eclipsed the doorframe, easily weighing 320 pounds of raw, unrefined muscle. He wasn't there to learn, he was a bouncer from a local nightclub, a man who made his living throwing drunks through windows, and he had heard the rumors about the little dragon. He stepped onto the mat with his boots still on, violating the sanctity of the dojo, and his voice boomed like thunder in a canyon as he sneered, "Size always wins." The room fell into silence so profound you could hear the traffic outside. The students, a mix of street fighters, judokas, and karate practitioners, tensed up, expecting Bruce to explode. But Lee didn't even blink. He simply stopped his demonstration, his hands relaxing by his sides, his breathing undetectable. He turned slowly to face the intruder, looking up at a man who outweighed him by nearly 200 pounds and towered over him by a head. The visual disparity was comical to the uninitiated, the kind of mismatch that usually results in a hospital visit for the smaller man. The bouncer crossed his massive arms, a smirk playing on his lips, convinced that physics was solely on his side. He believed what most of the world believed at that time, that mass moves mass, and that technique is a fragile thing when it crashes against a wall of granite. He looked at Bruce like a wolf looks at a rabbit, completely unaware that he had just walked into a cage with a tiger. To understand the gravity of this moment, you have to understand the era. In the 1960s, martial arts were rigid, bound by centuries of tradition and forms that often had little to do with actual combat. Bruce Lee was the disruptor, the man telling the world that their classical mess was useless in a street fight. This made him a target. Every week, tough guys, street brawlers, and masters from other schools would show up at his door to test him. They wanted to prove that this small actor with his fancy philosophy was a fraud. The bouncer was just the latest in a long line of challengers, but he represented the most primal threat, the idea that brute force is the ultimate trump card. He wasn't interested in art, he was interested in destruction. He challenged Bruce to move him, to hurt him, mocking the very idea that a man of Bruce's stature could generate enough force to make a dent in 300 pounds of meat. Bruce gestured for the students to clear the floor, his face a mask of absolute calm. There was no ego in his stance, only a terrifying readiness. He didn't take a classical karate stance or a boxing guard. He simply stood there, his lead hand slightly extended, his knees bent in that deceptive, spring-loaded crouch that would later become the signature of Jeet Kune Do. The bouncer laughed, a guttural sound, and lunged forward. He didn't throw a punch, he tried to grab Bruce, to wrap those massive arms around him and crush the life out of him like a boa constrictor. It was a move that had worked on every other man he had ever fought. Against a normal opponent, the sheer momentum of 300 pounds moving forward is unstoppable. But Bruce Lee was not a normal opponent. What happened next took less time than it takes to draw a breath. As the giant surged forward, Bruce didn't retreat. This was the first shock. Most men, faced with an avalanche, run away. Bruce moved into the space the bouncer occupied. He utilized the principle of the intercepting fist, the core of his philosophy. Before the bouncer's hands could even close, Bruce had closed the distance. The students watching later described it as a blur, a sudden explosion of kinetic energy that the human eye struggled to track. Bruce didn't try to push the man, he struck him. A side kick delivered with the velocity of a piston slammed into the bouncer's knee, hyperextending the joint and halting his forward momentum instantly. The giant gasped, his structure collapsing, but before he could register the pain, Bruce was already inside his guard. It was 8 seconds of controlled chaos. Bruce didn't just hit him, he dismantled him. The back fist whipped out with such speed that it sounded like a whip cracking, connecting with the bouncer's temple. The big man's head snapped back, his eyes rolling, his equilibrium shattered. The size always wins theory was disintegrating in real time. Bruce transitioned seamlessly, flowing like water, using the bouncer's own weight against him. He trapped the man's flailing arm and delivered a short-range punch to the solar plexus, the kind of blow that doesn't look like much from the outside but feels like a sledgehammer on the inside. The air left the bouncer's lungs in a tortured wheeze. The massive body that had seemed so invincible moments ago was now crumpling, folding in on itself as the nervous system shut down under the precision of the assault. Then came the finish. Bruce didn't need to batter the man into unconsciousness, he simply controlled him. With the bouncer on his knees, gasping for air, clutching his chest, Bruce stopped. He stood over the defeated giant, not with arrogance, but with the cool detachment of a surgeon who has just completed a procedure. The fight had lasted 8 seconds. The silence that followed was heavier than the bouncer himself. The students stared wide-eyed, struggling to process the physics of what they had just witnessed. They had seen a man who could bench press a small car reduced to a trembling heap by a man who looked like a college student. Bruce looked down at the man and offered a hand to help him up, a gesture of ultimate superiority and humility wrapped in one. This encounter wasn't just a fight, it was a physics lesson. Bruce later used this moment to teach his students about the relationship between mass and acceleration. Force equals mass times acceleration. The bouncer had mass, but he had zero acceleration. Bruce had less mass, but his acceleration was off the charts. By concentrating all that speed into a small surface area, the knuckles or the heel, he could generate force far exceeding what the bouncer could withstand. It was the difference between being hit by a slow-moving truck and a high-velocity bullet. The truck might weigh more, but the bullet pierces. Bruce explained that size isn't just weight, it's the efficient recruitment of every muscle fiber in the body firing in perfect synchronization. The bouncer, once he had recovered his breath and his dignity, didn't attack again. He was shaken, his worldview shattered. He had walked in believing that the laws of the jungle were simple, the big eat the small. He walked out knowing that skill, when refined to the razor's edge that Bruce possessed, transcends biological advantages. He had become a believer, not through words, but through the visceral experience of total domination. This story spread through the martial arts underground like wildfire, cementing Bruce's reputation not just as a theorist, but as a man who could back up every word he wrote with terrifying violence if pushed. What makes this story resonate decades later is that it encapsulates the core of the Bruce Lee legend. He wasn't a magician, he was a scientist of combat. He stripped away the non-essentials. While the bouncer relied on the natural gift of size, Bruce relied on the cultivated gift of self-knowledge. He understood human anatomy better than his opponents understood their own bodies. He knew exactly where the leverage points were, how to disrupt balance, and how to overload the sensory input of an adversary. In those 8 seconds, he demonstrated that a fight is not one on the scale, it is one in the mind and in the nervous system. The incident also highlighted the brutal reality of the interception philosophy. Jeet Kune Do was designed for this exact scenario, ending a confrontation before the opponent has a chance to impose their will. Bruce didn't wait to see what the bouncer would do. He didn't wait to block a punch, he attacked the attack. The moment the bouncer signaled aggressive intent, the fight was already over. This preemptive mindset is what made Bruce so dangerous. He didn't play by the turn-based rules of sparring, he operated in the realm of survival. As the bouncer limped out of the dojo, the students turned back to Bruce, expecting a speech, a boast, or a celebration. Instead, Bruce simply wiped a bead of sweat from his forehead, reset his stance, and said, "Now back to the lead punch. Emotional content is key." He returned to the lesson as if nothing had happened, proving that for him, the fight was just another movement, another expression of the truth he lived every day. The memory of the giant crumpling to the floor remained burned in the minds of everyone present, a permanent reminder that in the face of absolute technical perfection, size is just a number. Bruce Lee's legacy is often caught up in the movies, the screams, and the yellow jumpsuit. But the real legend was built in these sweaty, unrecorded moments in garages and backrooms. It was built on the broken egos of men who thought they were invincible until they met the dragon. That day, a 320-pound man learned the hard way that while stone can crush scissors, water can erode stone, and Bruce Lee was the crashing wave that no wall could withstand. The lesson remains timeless. Do not mistake size for power, and never, ever underestimate the man who has turned his body into a weapon of honest self-expression.